economist and director, Dr. Bill Rosenberg, joining us on the panel. Good afternoon,
Hello.
Bill.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, well, the first strike in New Zealand was over the 40-hour week.
It was it?
Parental back in Wellington in 1840. I think when you're thinking about these things, we're really talking about whether we work to live or whether we live to work. And the more that these hours dominate our lives, the more we're living to work rather than thinking about, what is life all about? Why are we earning this? We're also here to have some leisure, to look after our families, to work and do things in the community. And I think the more people, working these horrendous hours, the less our communities work properly. And you also got to think that, when you have principals and teachers and early childhood workers, midwives and so on, working these kinds of hours, they can't do their best in those hours. Your brain just stops working properly after a while, doesn't it? I think this has got well beyond what's sensible here. I think it's also, it's interesting. We're actually got, I was just looking at the hours people work, and if you look at the proportion of us who work sort of in that 35 to 45 hours per week bracket, it's about a third of the workforce. It's still the most frequent working arrangements, and it's not that much different from what it was way back in 1986 when these surveys started. But we do have almost a quarter of the workforce who are working 45 hours or more, and an appreciable number, about 1 in 6, who are working over 50 hours. So there is a lot of people who are really working very long hours.
Yes, and that's the point of this Melbourne Age column. And the columnist, who's a lawyer, bemoans it. And yet, Nikki, you probably just heard Nikki Bill say this is essentially anachronistic. And she may be right in terms of the corporate type of attitude towards it now.
Well, I don't think it's anachronistic. As I say, it's really about what we are doing all this work for. Is it to give ourselves better lives, or is it simply to serve the needs of a business and the economy, whatever the economy might be? I always think the economy is actually all the things that we do to work and is to give ourselves better lives. So I don't accept that, and I think it's worth thinking about how we can share the work round so that we all have decent lives as well as a good income.
Presumably, if we may do with less profit, more jobs would be created through some people not being expected to work so hard in the name of personal productivity. In other words, you'd be able to squeeze more people into the workforce, wouldn't you?
Well, you can think about it in terms of, as the French have done, in reducing work hours and thereby have more people in the job, although actually you find that if people work a few less hours, they actually work more efficiently. But you could also think about it in terms of raising productivity. And one of a lot of people, I think, as I've experienced, you hear people, our managers saying, repeatedly, we must do more with less.
Yes, no, that is a catch cry.
Of the time.
Hey, forgive me, I've slight time miscalculation. Bill, lovely of you to join us. Nikki Bazant, thank you for coming on the panel today.
Pleasure.
Max Ritchie, nice to see you.
Nice to be here, Jim.
We're back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint is on the way.
Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Rowan Quinn in for John Campbell. Tonight, another iconic New Zealand design is forced to admit not all of its collection is made in New Zealand. An historic pay parity deal for the football ferns. They'll now be able to fly business class when they're representing New Zealand. A study into rheumatic fever in the health system uncovers signs of racism in the system. We talk to a Big Island Hawaii resident who describes losing his family home to lava flow as the Christchurch volcano continues to wreak havoc. And a Christchurch businessman shuts down for a week to take his entire workforce of 45 on a trip to Las Vegas. That and the stoush over seasonal workers in the Bay of Plenty, and a nervous Bishop of Canterbury after the news. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The government may get rid of benefit stand-down periods for people who do seasonal work. When a person goes off the benefit and works for more than 26 weeks, they have to wait for 2 weeks before they can go back on it. The Employment Minister, Willie Jackson, says the government will investigate whether a stand-down period is needed at all for seasonal workers.
Well, that's what we're debating right now in terms of our total review. But, we think that the punitive approach is not the way to go.
Employment Minister Willie Jackson. A paid parental leave advocacy group says it's time for the law to be modernised and updated. The government is to make an ex gratia payment to a father after his partner died in childbirth and he wasn't eligible for paid parental leave. The Prime Minister says it has exposed a flaw in the legislation. The spokesperson for 26 for Babies, Fleur Fitzsimons, says the case has highlighted some inflexibilities in the law.
Look, the government's focus on undoing some of the complexities in the paid parental leave scheme is welcome, and there's others that need to be looked at as well. For example, the accrual of annual leave while on parental leave, which is currently paid at a very low rate on return to work.
Fleur Fitzsimons says it's a time for a modern look at the paid parental leave scheme, so it's open to all parents. Residents in Piha on Auckland's west coast say a concrete emergency plan is crucial after 2 floods and 2 power cuts in the space of 4 months. Wild weather took out power for about 8 days last month, followed by severe flooding that closed roads and damaged properties. The Waitakere Local Board says it's organising a meeting with civil defence and key leaders in the community to discuss how everything was handled. Heidi Padane, who's lived in the area for 20 years, says it's clear there are gaps.
We are likely to see more extreme weather events, and we definitely need to have something a little bit more solid in place than what we have currently, and I'm not even sure what we have currently.
Piha resident Heidi Padane. Police say they now believe the murder of a Tauranga man was a case of mistaken identity. A 52-year-old Gate Pa resident, David Rawiri Kuka, was shot execution-style at his home on Willrose Place in February. A month earlier, another man, Lance Waite, was fatally injured at the same address. The police say after extensive inquiries, they now believe Mr Kuka was not the intended victim of the cowardly attack. Detective Inspector Lou Warner says someone will know something which will help get answers for Mr Kuka's family. They're appealing for anyone with information to come forward and are interested in anyone who recognises a silver vehicle that was near the scene at the time. 2 men were left unconscious after being assaulted in a frenzied attack by a group of 8 men on Auckland's Queen Street at the weekend. Police say the 2 victims were walking down the street about 2:30 on Saturday morning when a group started attacking them. Sally Murphy reports.
Detective Constable Tom Malcolm says one of the victims commented that he liked the music the group was playing, but that was the only interaction they had. The men remain in Auckland Hospital recovering from their injuries. Mr Malcolm says the police are concerned about the random nature of the attack and they're appealing for witnesses. The police have CCTV footage of the assault, but it's too graphic to be released. In Auckland, Sally Murphy.
Lava spewing up to 90 metres high from an erupting Hawaiian volcano has destroyed 35 homes and other buildings. Residents evacuated from the Leilani estate, returning for brief home visits, are being warned to be ready to flee at a moment's notice. People from a second area, Lanipuna Gardens, have been barred from returning home at all due to deadly volcanic gases. Kilauea, which began exploding a week ago with fountains and rivers of lava flowing into neighbourhoods, has opened 10 volcanic vents since then. Tourism New Zealand is set to change the focus of its 100% Pure brand. The slogan has been used for 20 years, but today the organisation's chief executive, Stephen England Hall, told delegates at the industry event Trends in Dunedin that it plans to change the brand in the coming months. Mr England Hall says the brand does not showcase New Zealand's unique people and culture, and the government agency will work with Māori tourism and other groups to relaunch next year.
He says Tourism New Zealand is committed to evolving what 100% pure means to the audience.
Over the last 20 years, it's ebbed and flowed as the focus of that. So it's focused at times on the landscapes, it's focused at times on Hobbits, Lord of the Rings, 100% Middle Earth, and now we're just feeling that given the drive globally towards increasing the experiential economy, people want to spend money on things that are unique and fulfilling as opposed to material or item.
Stephen England Hall. It's 5:05. Pay parity for the football ferns was a no-brainer, says New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andy Martin. A new collective contract for the All Whites and the football ferns announced today gives the country's top players the same match fees, the same percentage of tournament prize money and business class travel when flying on international duty. Martin says they wanted to make a statement to the sporting world.
We want to really focus on the women's game for the next couple of years ahead of the World Cup, and this was a great opportunity to do the right thing and put it on a firm footing, really. We now have a football department that runs both teams, so they're all aligned in what they think. So it was the right thing to do to say, look, let's treat our elite athletes exactly the same.
New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andy Martin. The Kiwis' new rugby league coach will be named on Thursday, with former South Sydney coach Michael Maguire apparently set to take over the reins of the national team. Reports from Australia suggest the 44-year-old Maguire will replace David Kidwell, who stepped down after last year's disastrous World Cup campaign. Maguire spent 5 years at the Redfern-based club, guiding them to their first NRL premiership in 43 years when they won the 2014 NRL title. Former New South Wales coach Laurie Daly and former Manly coach Jeff Tuvey also applied for the job but have missed out, while former Canterbury coach Des Hasler, who initially expressed an interest in the role, subsequently withdrew from contention. And that's the news.
Putin in the throne room of the Tsars.
He is among the best briefed, most careful, most attentive, most forward-thinking senior government leaders that I've met.
Better bedding for cows.
Because you've got composting going on in the bedding, where the cow's lying, she's dry and warm, and the cows love it.
And workers still on the couch.
Why we've got people so disillusioned. It's not so simplistic that we just boot them off the couch.
Wake up with Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, tracking the spread of flu with a new online flu dashboard. And after 10, we talk to Awa, a young filmmaker, a transgender teen from the Kapiti Coast, about her journey to becoming her authentic self. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, mainly fine. However, areas of cloud and isolated showers in western areas south of Auckland. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, apart from a few early showers about the western ranges. Northwesterlies easing early tomorrow. For Bulla, isolated showers turning to rain tonight, then clearing early tomorrow and becoming fine. Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north, briefly heavy with possible thunderstorms. Rain clearing overnight, but a few showers remaining about Fiordland. Otago and Southland and Stewart Island, brief rain, then mainly fine. A few showers lingering about coastal Southland until tomorrow morning. West to northwest gales, severe and exposed places, easing early tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, a mix of fine and cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Rowan Quinn.
Thanks, Anna. The New Zealand designer Zambezi has been forced to admit this afternoon that not all of its collection is made in New Zealand. It comes after the world designer Denise Lestrange-Corbet yesterday conceded some of her collection included T-shirts made in Bangladesh and sweatshirts made in China, despite swing tags stating the clothing was made in New Zealand. Checkpoint visited Zambezi's Ponsonby store today and found a beaded dress with a Zambezi label that was actually made in Calcutta, India. This despite the company's website stating all Zambezi's garments are proudly made in New Zealand. So what constitutes made in New Zealand and how widespread is this labelling? Zach Fleming went to find out.
Zambezi's been proudly making clothes in New Zealand for 39 years. Founded by husband and wife Neville and Elizabeth Finlay, the brand's website says all Zambezi garments are proudly made in New Zealand at their dedicated Auckland workroom. But there should be a small asterisk there.
Hand beaded or hand sequined items out of India.
That's Elizabeth Finlay. I called her after visiting her Zambezi store in Ponsonby today. Checkpoint's today been checking on Kiwi designers who claim 100% of their designs are New Zealand made. Almost everything in Zambezi was. Almost. One black beaded $755 dress was made in India. Pedantic? Maybe. But I asked Elizabeth Finlay why.
We order the fabric, so the fabric comes in completely beaded. We cut through the beading to make our first samples, which means you've got to hand sew everything back on where you've cut, because obviously beads can't go through a machine. And so then we make the patterns, and then we send the patterns away, and they actually hand bead them to our pattern.
So still designed here, but not made here. She says the manufacturer is child labour free, and she's been assured it meets ethical industry standards.
It's very, very labour intensive, and it would make the garments kind of probably not accessible, I guess. I don't.
You mean too
know.
Expensive?
It would make them quite expensive, yeah, because it's quite labour intensive, and you need like the right sort of craftspeople to hand bead and hand sequin pieces.
The conversation that we had with Dame Denise yesterday was around this same area. So on your website it says twice in your About Zambezi thing that all Zambezi garments are proudly made in New Zealand.
In New Zealand, I know. Well, we haven't, I guess to us they are. Like it's all the main collection is made in New Zealand. It's a pretty big collection.
But it says, I guess it's that word all,
yeah,
isn't it?
I know. I agree. I think that we need to think about how we, word things. We're not trying to. I mean, because in the label it clearly states where it's made, but
yeah, it says made.
I guess
made
we're
in
not
Kolkata.
trying to, pull the wool over anybody's eyes or anything like that.
So why make it then? Given Zambezi's foundation is made in New Zealand and 99.9% of it always has been, is it worth it?
Rembrandt have gone offshore, and we've always had our suiting made by Rembrandt down in Wellington, and they've gone to China, and we've just gone, well, we can't now make our suits there because we're New Zealand made. I mean, we're now looking for manufacturing in New Zealand that we can replace that with. So, I mean, we do care about made in New Zealand. We're immensely proud of it because we're one of the few companies left that does employ, our own staff plus out workers and out factories to produce, Zambezi. But
so this is something that you think about then, when you realise that it's not New Zealand made. So I guess why the beaded thing? If you knew that the suits,
like I said, I guess I fall in love with fabric, and I just think, well, we could never make that here. We could never get it together as beautifully as they will in India from our fabric supplier who will make the template.
Elizabeth says Zambezi hasn't made any beaded items for over a year. The dress we saw today was discounted, half price.
We make here because we care about manufacture in New Zealand. We're trying to grow the industry. We have great long-standing relationships with all our makers here, with our own staff. We have our own machinists. We do all our cutting here in our own workroom. We do all our hand finishing here. We employ 35 people over our stores and our workroom.
So this all begs the question, when is it no longer okay to say we make all our clothes in New Zealand? If it's 99%, do you get a pass? What about if it's everything except for things that would be prohibitively expensive here? By NZ Made's Acting Executive Director Anna Haywood says misleading claims about where products are made could be damaging to the fashion industry.
There's no precise formula as to what constitutes as New Zealand made. The Commerce Commission states whether a product is New Zealand made is a question of fact and degree, and the relevant considerations will vary depending on the nature of the product and also what the consumer may understand about it. So for clothing, relevant considerations may include where the clothing has turned from fabric into a garment and, where it has gone through significant manufacturing.
So alongside Zambezi, we called around other Kiwi designers today to check up on their 100% New Zealand made claims.
Everything we make is made locally in New Zealand. So, we know a lot of our makers by name.
That's Madeline Harmon of Harmon Grabisa.
100% made in New Zealand.
And Anjali Stewart of 27 Names. Auckland-based designer Vicky Taylor also told us her flagship brand Taylor is all made in New Zealand. That range has a white Taylor label sewn into the garments. But 3 years ago she created a second brand for a new, smaller collection of hers that's not made in New Zealand.
We do produce, I think it's about 7 or 8 pieces of knitwear that come out under a different brand called By Taylor. And the By Taylor has a grey sewn label, and that is manufactured offshore.
Miss Taylor says all the By Taylor clothes also have a Made in China label in them. She says the new casual range had to be affordable, but that wasn't possible to do in New Zealand.
That basically gives us the ability, I think the ability to basically sell a T-shirt at $79, $90, while if we were manufacturing here in New Zealand it would be about $240, I think is the cheapest at retail I can get now.
She says it's much harder for New Zealand designers to get clothes made here than when she started 20 years ago. She says there were 40 or 50 textile wholesalers they could buy fabrics from then. Now there are 5 or 6.
It's not just the textile side that's got hard. I mean, we have very few machinists nowadays that are working here in New Zealand. So, for me, it's been a changing time, but New Zealand designers will always survive because we always find a way of making things.
Another Auckland designer, Tanya Carlson, says all her clothes are made in New Zealand, cut by New Zealand pattern makers and sewn by New Zealand machinists.
We make some of our garments here in our workroom. We make both with our machinists. Some are made in small workrooms within Auckland, and some are literally made in women's garages and workrooms in houses all over Auckland.
But Tanya says keeping business in New Zealand doesn't come cheap. Take a simple woman's slip, for example.
To have something like that made with, I'm trying to think about the level of components that our slips have, which will probably about 6 to 7 pieces in a pattern, and then elastic and all the trims that go with it. I mean, I would say that we would be probably looking at just having it sewn, maybe up to $40, could be up to $40. And then your fabric cost on top of that, so that may end up being around 20, so you're looking at 60 before you take in any wages of pattern cutters and staff and rent and anything else. So you can see how it's tough, and then people say, that's $150, or $130. That's difficult.
So how do New Zealand designers navigate this? Let's go back to Zambezi, who, remember, make almost all of their clothes in New Zealand.
We are very committed to making in New Zealand, and I think that's a really important thing. I think that you're overshadowing, the good part about what we do. After all this has gone down, I probably won't ever do it ever again, because why? I don't need this in my life, to be honest.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Well, the All Whites and the Football Ferns will now be paid the same after a pay parity deal was announced this afternoon. While a big difference remains in the prize money offered at men's and women's FIFA tournaments, the new collective agreement means all elite New Zealand players will have pay parity. That includes the same percentage share of prize money, equal rights for image use, and for the first time the women's team will fly business class when representing New Zealand. Striker Sarah Gregorius came out of retirement last year. She's also on the board of the New Zealand Professional Footballers Association, and I asked her what she thinks about the news.
The news is amazing. I think it's such an awesome line that we've now drawn in the sand in terms of no matter who you are, what gender, when you pull on the New Zealand football shirt, you're entitled to the same treatment, that dignity and that respect no matter what. So it's wonderful. It's such an awesome feeling, and I'm so stoked that it got over the line.
Was it something that used to irk you a little bit when you did play for the Football Ferns?
Oh, absolutely. I think in any sense there's a lot of female athletes and female players out there who have felt, the sting of unequal treatment at some point in their careers, and it's tough. It hurts, and I think particularly over time, that feeling can sort of accumulate and lead to some real genuine frustration. So I think this is a really positive step into making sure that none of that kind of exists going forward when players are assembling with the national team.
And part of the old way of doing things, the women's team had to fly economy. Well, the men went business class. What was it like to sort of fly an economy and then have to step up to play a big game?
It is really difficult. It takes a toll physically, obviously. You know, you're behind the eight ball a little bit when you land. You're not able to train properly with the team, so that precious time together training and preparing for the game is compromised. And then, you know, if you're having to travel and only arrive in a couple of days before a big match, it can affect you in your performance in that game as well. So I think when the performance, you know, for your country is compromised by something like that, like it's almost not acceptable. And you want to be able to put your best foot forward no matter what, and have the support around you to ensure that that can happen. So this is a step towards that, so that, you know, when we are competing on the world stage, we don't have to, you know, have the effects of the flight in our legs. We can go to battle and do well and do our country proud no matter what.
And practically speaking, what are the other differences that will be in place now for the women compared to the men players?
I think it's the most tangible benefit, I think, for the players will be around the travel. Obviously, we have parity in terms of remuneration as well, and the way that our intellectual property is now protected. We have equality in terms of the share of prize money that we take home from major events. So it's just a real kind of symbolic stand in that, you know, no matter what, this is what you're entitled to. It's no different, male or female. So I think symbolically, that's really important, and knowing that we now stand alongside the male players rather than, you know, sort of literally speaking back in economy while they're treated a bit differently. So I think in terms of what it means outside of the travel, the pay parity and the insurance around our intellectual property and prize money and things like that, those are the sorts of little things that, you know, all add up to make a pretty big difference.
And what have the players, current and former, that you've talked to about this today been saying to you?
It's actually been really cool now that I'm back involved with the football firms. I was with the team in Spain. So it was really cool to be able to explain to them and educate the players on what this new agreement means to them and get that really early feedback and see, you know, kind of the discussion now starting to take place and how energised they felt by, you know, what a step forward it was. And when it first got discussed in the media towards the end of last year, how many players came out in support of it, not just football firms, but all whites as well, and then players from other codes and football players around the world as well who are fighting their battles with their own organisations in their home countries. So just across the board, it's been nothing but positivity, nothing but like, wow, okay, this is cool, I'm behind it, let's do this, let's make a stand.
Of course, there's some, I guess, some disparity still in the prize money, because the prize money offered in some of the big men's tournaments isn't as much as the prize money offered in the women's tournaments. What would you like to see happen in that space?
Oh, I think that has to change, absolutely. It's not even to the point where it's, you know, we're getting half the prize money at FIFA events. It is a minuscule amount in comparison with the men. So I think, you know, those sorts of stakeholders who make those decisions need to kind of, I guess, move with the times now and start to look at the women's game equally, treat, you know, those players in those tournaments the same. And I think it should be, and it needs to be, the start of a conversation around prize money and what, because that again puts, you know, it puts a bit of a spotlight on the value of, you know, the female game to, you know, for those organisations and how they view it and how they see it moving forward. So I think, and I'm hopeful that it's the start of, you know, wider conversations within our own sport and within other sports to say, hang on, are we actually treating our players fairly? Is there equality? Is there equity? And what can we do about it if that's not the case?
And that's the all-white striker Sarah Gregorius there. Well, a study into the increase in rheumatic fever in Māori and Pacific people has uncovered claims of racism and rough handling of patients suffering from the disease. Some of the participants in the Auckland University research even reported being called names like coconut in hospital. 113 people participated in the study, which explored Māori and Pacific whānau experiences and understandings of rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Shannon Honui Thompson spoke to the study's lead author, Dr. Annika Anderson.
This isn't a disease of Māori and Pacific. There's no genetic evidence to show this. This is a disease of structural inequity. There's a lot of evidence in New Zealand to show that racism is a key determinant of health. So I think you'd be a bit naive not to expect to find it when you're looking within health research. But we were seeing it at all levels. So as well as seeing institutionalised racism, where we've got a healthcare system that's privileging non-Māori, non-Pacific, we're also seeing interpersonal levels of racism. So that Pacific patients are actually being called coconuts in hospitals within hearing range of each other, where they were visibly seeing healthcare professionals treating them differently from non-Māori, non-Pacific patients. And so that was quite disturbing, actually, to see that it was quite a shared or a common experience, particularly within hospitals for many of our patients. The third different dimension of racism, that internalised racism, was also evident, which is really sad, and we've seen our own whānau actually believing in these messages and sort of blaming themselves, particularly the mothers, for their children getting sick.
Some people felt they were being treated roughly, physically.
Yeah. So we had a lot of young children had complaints, and they were hospitalised about the way that they were showered, with it being really rough, causing bruising. We had one young male participant who the healthcare professionals would wait for when he was sleeping at night, and then they'd give him injections in his buttocks, and he felt extremely uncomfortable with that and quite unnerved, and his caregiver got so worried about it, she ended up staying in hospital with him to prevent that. So there was, in a lot of the ways that the bicillin injections are delivered, because they're quite deep in the muscle in the buttocks, so they can be painful anyway, but patients often described what they called a jab and go technique, where it was a quick in and out, quite rough, and left them feeling quite sore and tender for not only days but up to a week or so after the injection was delivered.
Were you shocked by all this?
We had expected to see some form of bias and institutionalised racism. We were not expecting to see the level of, I guess, interpersonal racism that we encountered. Although in saying that, there were examples of excellent healthcare providers, and where we saw that, whānau talked about, the whanaungatanga, or the rapport that was built up between them and their providers, and the respect and care that was shown. But unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. As I said, particularly in hospital, the secondary care context, where it was really common. In fact, some of the best support that was shown in hospital environments were often from cleaners and caretakers that were often also Māori or Pacific people. So that was pretty heartbreaking for us. And I was also surprised that the healthcare professionals, many of the healthcare professionals themselves, who often were non-Māori, non-Pacific, also talked about racism. I remember one of the hospital physicians we talked to said, you'd have to be deaf, blind and dumb not to realise that racism goes on, very commonly within these contexts, and how sad that was.
That was our Te Manu Kōrahi editor Shannon Haunui-Thompson speaking to Dr. Annika Anderson. A father who wasn't eligible for paid parental leave after his partner died in childbirth says it's an incredible relief that he'll receive an ex gratia payment from the government. That's a one-off payment that's made even when there's no legal obligation to do so. The fact that the father was unable to access paid parental leave has exposed what the Prime Minister says is a flaw in the legislation. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The father, Keith Faulkner, says he didn't start the day wanting to get a big payment.
I started the day just wanting to highlight a hole in the system. The money wasn't, and the payment wasn't what I wanted. But it does enable me to have a life with my son.
It must be a huge relief for you.
Incredibly, my work has helped me so much. But equally, there's a point where I can't continually rely on them, So it's hard to put it into words.
Jacinda Ardern says when she saw the father's story, she immediately contacted the relevant minister and read the legislation herself.
I think everyone's, wants to see that support in place, and I have to say I was baffled when I read it and really concerned.
The Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says the man's wife had not been working for 12 months, so was not eligible for paid parental leave, and there was therefore no entitlement to transfer to him. He says he's not aware of the situation arising before, and the gap in the legislation will have to be addressed.
But more immediately, I'm very pleased to say that we have found a solution for this particular gentleman and his family. MB will make an ex gratia payment to him to the equivalent amount that he would have received under paid parental leave.
Mr Lees-Galloway says work will begin on updating the law.
I think it is appropriate that we look at legislative change. I've been considering a review of the Act. This would be something that would be some time off yet, but the Act really needs a technical review anyway, so there's an opportunity for us to consider gaps in the legislation like this.
The National Party leader, Simon Bridges, says the case is very harrowing.
You know, you've got a guy here whose partner's just died. It seems awful. I can't quite understand actually why he's not eligible from reading the case. So there's obviously a bit of detail in it. I don't think I would be critical of the government coming in with money here.
The spokesperson for the 26 for Babies coalition, Fleur Fitzsimons, says the case has highlighted some problems with the inflexibility of the law.
Look, the government's focus on undoing some of the complexities in the paid parental leave scheme is welcome, and there's others that need to be looked at as well. For example, the accrual of annual leave while on parental leave, which is currently paid at a very low rate on return to work.
Fleur Fitzsimons says it's time for a good modern look at the paid parental leave scheme so that it's open to all parents. Atu i te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramalaho.
With Checkpoint coming up, why the government may get rid of the benefit stand-down periods for people who do seasonal work. A Big Island resident describes losing his family home to lava flow as the Kilauea volcano continues to erupt. And a Christchurch man shuts down his business for a week to take his entire workforce of 45 on a holiday to Las Vegas. We'd love your feedback, particularly on the New Zealand Made issue. You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint Radio NZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Thanks, Rowan. The Employment Minister, Willie Jackson, says the government will look into whether seasonal workers need to be stood down at all before going back on the benefit. Currently, if a person goes off the benefit and works for more than 6 months, they have to wait 2 weeks before they can go back on it. The Bay of Plenty has declared a seasonal labour shortage for the first time in more than 10 years as it tries to find local workers to pick kiwi fruit. A paid parental leave advocacy group says it's time for the law to be modernised and updated so it's open to all parents. The government is to make an ex gratia payment to a father after his partner died in childbirth and he wasn't eligible for paid parental leave. The spokesperson for 26 for Babies, Fleur Fitzsimons, says the case has highlighted inflexibilities in the law. Tourism New Zealand is set to change the focus of its 100% pure New Zealand brand. The slogan has been used for 20 years, but today the Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive told Trends delegates it plans to change the brand in the coming months. Stephen England Hall says 100% pure does not showcase New Zealand's unique people and culture. He says the government agency will work with Māori tourism before it relaunches its brand next year. 2 men who were left unconscious after a frenzied attack by 8 men on Auckland's Queen Street remain in hospital more than 3 days after the assault. The police say the 2 victims were walking down the street about 2:30 on Saturday morning when the group started attacking them. More than 35 buildings have been destroyed by an erupting volcano that sent rivers of lava flowing into neighbourhoods on Hawaii's Big Island. Kilauea, which began exploding a week ago, is shooting fountains of lava up to 90 metres high, and 12 volcanic fissures have now opened up. 1,700 people have been evacuated, with those from Lanapuna Gardens barred from returning home due to deadly volcanic gases. And that's the news.
Thank you very much, Anna. And we're turning to business news now with Emile Donovan. Hi, Emile. You've got a report into regional economies out. What do we need to know from that one?
Hey, Rowan. Yeah, so this comes from Westpac Bank, and basically the short and the long of it is it's showing regional economies have perked up in the past quarter, but there are also signs that economic activity could be slowing down. So some of the good, some of the bad there. This report looks at about 10 criteria, stuff like economic confidence indices, retail sales, guest nights, new building consents and so on. And then it compares them quarter by quarter to see and gauge whether there's been economic improvement. Now, geographically, there's some interesting stuff. Southland is the best performing region. It saw an improvement in 8 criteria, and there were boosts as well for Wellington and for Auckland. And unsurprisingly, the top of the South Island and the West Coast are down. That's largely because of the nasty weather that they have had over the past 6-7 months or so. What sticks out, though, is that tourism is contributing a lot to a lot of these regions. Guest nights and thus retail spending is up in the vast majority of places. And interestingly, that's both in your classic tourist places like Otago and the Bay of Plenty, but also destinations that you'd euphemistically consider less touristy. Places like Wellington and Waikato. Forgive me, Wellingtonians and Waikato people. However, this report does warn that we might be getting close to capacity in some places. Auckland and the Hawke's Bay are 2 places that are mentioned there, so there's something to look out for there. But look, all in all, it's a pretty rosy picture. More places saw an improvement than did not, and while growth is being picked to slow down soon, there's no suggestion that that's alarmingly imminent.
And Emile, your colleague Nona Peltier has been talking to the crowdfunder Pledge Me as it plans to go over the Tasman. What's she been finding out?
Yeah, so Pledge Me, as you say, is a crowdfunding platform. It's been operating for about 4 years, and in that time it's raised about $25 million, which is, pretty impressive. Now, as you say, once again, it's looking to jump into Australia. It's been granted a licence and it's looking to start up operations across there in June. Now, the company's founder and chief executive, Anna Gunther, spoke to Nona yesterday. She says a large part of their business in New Zealand has been predicated on their effectiveness in helping business women get up and running, basically saying non-traditional fundraising platforms allow people to build a supportive network, and many business women have found that challenging because generally, and obviously this is a general kind of comment, they don't enjoy the kind of structural benefits of what you'd stereotypically call the old boys network. So I guess yet again an example of modern technology acting as a kind of equaliser. But anyway, it will be really interesting to see how Pledge Me does over in Australia.
Absolutely, Emile, and I'm sure your team will keep us posted. Meanwhile, how are the markets looking at the close of today?
Well, the NZX50 is up marginally 6 points. That's 0.07%. It closed on 8,594. And the dollar is buying 70.1 US cents, 93.4 Australian and 51.7 pence.
Thanks, Emile. Well, how would you like your employer to pay for you to go on an overseas holiday? The boss of Christchurch's Paul Kelly Motor Company is doing just that, offering to take every single one of his employees on an all-expenses-paid trip to Las Vegas for his car dealership's 20th anniversary. Paul Kelly is funding the trip for around 40 staff himself. No company money's involved, and he says there's a simple reason why. Logan Church reports.
It would be fair to say that employees at Paul Kelly Motor Company got the shock of their lives when their boss announced earlier this year he was sending them all to Las Vegas.
Out of nowhere, just told us over a beer. It was bloody exciting.
Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was a wee bit. I've only been here 2 years, but yeah, didn't expect that at all.
Pulled us all up into the office and announced it, and I think there was a lot of shock and a lot of excitement as well. I don't think people really believed it was going to happen.
I think initially everyone was kind of a bit drop-jawed and like, what the hell was he talking about? Is he serious? And then all of a sudden it clicked. He was dead serious. He's taking everyone to Vegas, and that's when the whole room kind of erupted and went crazy.
One of those lucky employees is Craig Stace, a mechanic who has worked for the company for 16 years. He's never been on an overseas trip like this, and it took him a while to fully comprehend that he was going to the entertainment capital of the world.
Yeah, not until really on the plane, but I know we are, but yeah, we've all got our tickets and everything like that as well, so yeah, it's all go. Yeah.
Have you been to Vegas yourself before?
No, never. No, I've been overseas somewhere else, but not anywhere near Vegas. No, so it's been pretty cool.
Staff at Paul Kelly Motor Company are used to extreme work events. Over the past few years, their boss has arranged amphibious boat racing, short film productions, and even his own version of the hit television show The Apprentice. Last year, they flew helicopters and aeroplanes. Craig says it's going to be hard to top the Vegas trip.
Oh God, I hate to imagine. Oh, it could be anything. The sky's the limit, really, isn't it? You know, so yeah, you just never know with Paul. He's always pretty generous, so it's, you know, he's always been like that.
Paul Kelly is paying for everyone's trip himself, which leaves a $150,000 hole in his pocket. His 4 car yards and service centre will be completely shut from next week as his team wing their way to Sin City. He says the trip has been months in the making.
At Christmas time, I was sitting down trying to work out what I was going to do for the 23rd anniversary. I was going to have my own version of amazing race down in Central Otago. The logistics were getting way too hard and it was getting extremely expensive to do it. So I sat down with my wife and said, why don't I just send the whole lot to Vegas with myself? She said, you're mad? And I said, well, I know I'm that. And that was it.
Paul Kelly says it's worth every penny, as his team works hard and are like a family to him.
I had some employers, or one in particular when I was a very young fella, that not the actual employer, but the manager there was just, he was awful to me. All I could ever think about is I just want my own business one day and I'm not going to be you, and I'm very glad I haven't done anything like what they used to do. Just used to get a hard time and not want to turn up. And, you know, why would you do that? I just don't understand it.
On the streets of Christchurch, people were amazed to hear about the trip and doubted their employers would be as generous.
Yeah, I work for a government department, so there's no frivolous spending like that at all. We pay for our own work too. Yeah. So social club, we just fundraise it.
No, I can't see that being a happening thing. It's a pretty big organisation. Sending sort of 7,000 people overseas might be a wee bit beyond the budget limitations.
What do your work dues typically look like?
Oh, we'll just go out to a cafe around town and have a few a meal and a few drinks. That's about it.
A lot simpler than going out to Las Vegas.
I'll say.
Paul Kelly and his team will take off for Las Vegas on Monday. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Hawaii's Kilauea volcano claimed more homes and buildings today as authorities warned more than 1,700 evacuees it may be months before they can return to their homes. 35 structures, including 26 homes, have now been destroyed as molten rock, toxic gas and steam burst through giant fissures created by the eruption. Local handyman Woodland Nelson learned his family home had burned to the ground and been consumed by lava flow.
We had to evacuate on Friday morning, and lava spewed out pretty much 10, 12, even more places now. And all the lava is rupturing all over the place in people's backyards. And I just found out that on yesterday morning, we were on our way to go get our stuff from the rest of the house, but we found out that our house was taking about half an hour before we could even get our stuff, because they were letting people in for a small amount of time, but it was already too late.
And had you known that was a possibility that your house could go?
We knew it was, underground from us and stuff, but we had no idea that it would happen this fast. It just kept spewing and spewing more and more. And then there's one that was on our street, which is Luana Street in Leilani Estates, and it was all downhill from there. And then actually went into my backyard. I got that viral video that you guys see all over the place with the yard and the greenhouse there. That's my house, and that's the lava in the backyard. And it unfortunately took the entire house and our 2 cars in our driveway.
So it was the lava that got your house, or was it fire started by the lava?
It was fire started by the lava, and then it first was on fire, and then the lava completely took over the house all the way into the street next door.
Does that mean you've lost everything, Woodland?
everything.
And who
Just
lives
about everything in our house.
Who lives in the house with you?
Where was that? That was my mother and my father. They worked their entire life for the house, and I was pretty much born and raised in that house my whole life. And my brother too. We only got photos, just bare essentials, insurance, paperwork, all that kind of stuff. But all of our clothes, couches, TVs, dishes, everything's gone.
What about rebuilding? You know, do they have insurance? Could they rebuild roughly in that area?
Yes, we're going to try. We still own the land. I mean, it's going to be 8 to 10 feet of lava that we have to try and break up. But, you know, it's going to be tough. But, you know, there's a lot of other people, too, in our neighborhood that has lost their house. I heard from the latest 30-plus houses now. So it's not just us, but we were one of the first houses to be taken over. But it's a real threat right now, and very, very frightening for the rest of the island. There might be more earthquakes as we speak. The big rift zone inside of the Earth, it fell about 1.5 feet into the ocean, and there's a big section left over. So there's a possibility to have another earthquakes, big earthquakes, and the eruptions are still going as we speak.
Woodland, can you describe for us what it's like, you know, when you're standing in that area near where your family home was before you had to leave? You know, what can you hear and see and smell?
Well, there's a big issue with the sulfur dioxide in the air. The volcanic fissures are spewing out all this, you know, invisible gas that we cannot see. But it smells a little bad, but the worst is the micro fibers in the air from the volcanic ash that could really harm our lungs and everything. So that whole area is deemed off limits. But only certain people are allowed in to get the house supplies and everything with bright equipment, respirators and everything. But it's a really big issue right now, and we're just trying to cope with it.
That was Big Island resident Woodland Nelson. Well, Janine Krippner's a New Zealand volcanologist who moved to Concord University in West Virginia to study satellite data and explosive volcanic eruptions. I asked her to explain what was happening in Hawaii.
Today, the lava flows have slowed down, but the seismicity, or the earthquakes that are being formed by the magma moving through the ground, is still high. So this is not over yet.
And what is the sort of, there are people who are living there at the moment. Some are saying we don't want to go, some are resigned to the fact they do have to go, but I understand that this could actually go on for weeks or months. You know, what's the cycle of a mountain like this when it erupts?
Yeah, it definitely could go on for quite a while. In fact, the 61G flow, which has just stopped because the lava source has been taken away, started erupting in 2016. So this could go on for quite a while, unfortunately.
What would you do if you were living there on the side of that mountain?
If I was in the Leilani Estate area, I would definitely get my valuables, my pets, and leave when I could. It's just not worth the risk. It really isn't. The gas is toxic. The lava flows, the fissures could open up somewhere else any time. It's not a safe situation.
What is it about the gas that's so toxic? Because it's not, a gas mask wouldn't solve your problems necessarily, would it?
It has to be a very specific gas mask, and generally you need training for them as well. But normally, high sulfur dioxide gives eye irritation, coughing, wheezing, sore throats and headaches, and it can cause respiratory distress, especially if people have pre-existing conditions. But near the fissures over the last few days, they have been at very high toxic levels.
What is it that makes them, more toxic sometimes than others?
It's really the concentration of the sulfur dioxide. So it's right at the vents right now. There's so much fresh, hot magma coming out as lava. that sulfur dioxide is naturally part of the lava. So it's kind of like a bottle of Coke. Before you open it, you can't see the gas because it's under pressure. It's in dilution with the liquid. But once you release that pressure by taking the cap off or erupting the magma, the gas can come out very quickly.
Janine, in Auckland, a place I know you'll be very familiar with, we're living on a volcanic field here, hundreds of thousands of people. Is our situation similar to that in Hawaii from a geological perspective, I suppose? Could we see an eruption like this?
Yes, you could. It's not the same kind of system. It's quite a different system there, but you do have a volcanic field which could produce lava flows similar to this. So the risks could be like this, and it would have the same uncertainty of having no idea how long it's going to last or where exactly it's going to affect.
And, just with those differences, how might an eruption start in Auckland that would be different to how it started in Kilauea?
You have the potential there to be more explosive, especially because you have a lot of water around. So when this lava or magma interacts with water, it can cause very explosive eruptions. And this can cause a pyroclastic surge or a cloud of really hot gas and ash and rock that races across the ground very quickly. Whereas the Kilauea eruption right now is quite slow-moving lava, so it's a little different.
And is that why people are able to kind of coexist with an active volcano there?
Yes, and there are a lot of people coexisting with explosive volcanoes around the world too, like in Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan. So this is happening relatively frequently.
Janine, you're originally from Te Awamutu. How did you end up studying volcanoes in the United States?
Good question. I grew up loving volcanoes. My grandfather would actually show me video of Kilauea and Vanuatu erupting, which are both going off right now when I was little. And when I was 13 at Te Awamutu College, I realized that a volcanologist was actually a thing, and I've been on that path ever since. But I came to the States to learn how to use satellite data to study explosive eruptions.
So it must be, in some ways, quite exciting for you when something like this happens.
I'm so full of concern for the local people right now, just thinking of what they're going through, not having any idea if their homes are going to be okay or if they can move back home or when.
And that's New Zealand-raised, United States-based volcanologist Janine Krippner. Well, National says the government's contradicting itself over its push to encourage people into seasonal work. A seasonal labour shortage has been declared in the Bay of Plenty for the first time in more than a decade as the region struggles to get local workers to pick kiwi fruit. Here's our political reporter Teresa Cowie.
When a person goes off the benefit and works for more than 26 weeks, they have to wait for a 2-week stand-down period before they can get back onto the benefit. The idea being that they should be able to save enough money from working to support themselves for a short time before going back on the benefit. National Social Development spokesperson Louise Upston says the government should consider exemptions on the stand-down period for seasonal workers.
There needs to be further work to consider what the options are. At the moment we've got a contradiction between two of the government ministers, one saying that seasonal work isn't acceptable for someone who's on a benefit, and yet the Minister of Social Development launched recently the Work the Seasons website, which is all about encouraging people who are not in work to get seasonal work, so it's a bit of a contradiction.
The Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, says there's no contradiction in promoting seasonal work while accepting that for beneficiaries, transport, childcare and accommodation costs can make it tricky to jump at the chance of seasonal work. She says the government is looking into making it easier for people to move between work and the benefit.
We discussed this while in opposition. It's in our Future of Work report as well. We need to look at the system to make sure that the transitions are seamless, and that's something that we'll be looking to consider as part of the welfare overhaul.
Employment Minister Willie Jackson says the government will investigate whether a stand-down period is needed at all.
Well, that's what we're debating right now in terms of our total review, but we think that the punitive approach is not the way to go.
Mike Chapman is the Chief Executive of Horticulture New Zealand, which represents growers. He doubts stand-downs are a particular problem for kiwi fruit harvesting, as most contracts wouldn't be for 6 months.
Depends on the seasonal work you're doing. If it's for harvest, harvest doesn't last 26 weeks. And so I'm not sure that it would affect a lot of people, but where it does affect people, certainly having some flexibility around removing that stand-down period would be an excellent way forward.
Mike Chapman says Work and Income already does a good job of getting people into work, and mostly it's other barriers like reliability and not being in a regular work routine that presents the greatest problems. Kiwi fruit grower Stuart Weston says the stand-down periods make no difference to most workers, and it seems many would rather have no income than pick kiwi fruit.
It's really difficult because we've got a systemic issue, multi-generational welfare dependency. This is not solved by asking a seasonal employer to throw them in a shed and work them hard and wonder why they can't handle it. This is a longer-term conversation that we need, and so one-dimensional answers just don't work.
Stuart Weston says there's no quick fix to the problem of finding local seasonal workers, and in his experience, paying them more would make no difference. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Teresa Cowie.
Dunedin's creative communities committed to a future involving professional theatre in the city. Last week, theatre enthusiasts were devastated by the news that the Fortune Theatre, which had staged shows for more than 4 decades, was closing its doors immediately. But at a public meeting today at Otago University's Allen Hall Theatre, more than 50 people from the arts community pledged to keep professional theatre alive in Dunedin. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was there.
The depth of feeling for Fortune Theatre and the emotional toll its closure has taken on Dunedin's performing arts scene was plain for all to see.
There's been a really quick move, I've read it, to relegate the Fortune to history, to talk about memories. I'm so sorry for being emotional, I'm exhausted.
This is a tragedy for drama students in this city, and it's a tragedy for Dunedin, because we think we're an arty city, that we support the arts. I don't believe we've been given the opportunity to do so in this case, and I don't think that this should be let go easily.
There is a bigger picture. It is not only loss for Dunedin. I think it is going to really have repercussion for arts in New Zealand.
I think that with this sort of goodwill and determination and guts, we are in a better place than 44 years ago.
Just some of the responses from those who attended the Save Fortune Theatre meeting today. Organiser, third-year Otago Theatre Studies student Sarah Latter says she is impressed by the groundswell of support for preserving professional arts in New Zealand's first UNESCO creative city.
I feel like everyone's feeling a bit of grief in their heart for Fortune, and even though Fortune Theatre was never about the building, it was about the family and the productions involved. Action needs to be taken, really, whatever that is.
Sarah Latter says the response from Dunedin's creative community and the depth of ideas generated by attendees at the meeting has given her a renewed heart that professional theatre will continue in the city.
I don't know what the way forward is going to be. Right now it's just not for me to decide, but I do believe that there is hope there. Even if the building is left behind, there will still be something in Dunedin.
Among those in attendance was Barry Dorking, who was with Fortune Theatre back in 1974 when it was just a fledgling theatre company.
It was a company of actors, so we went out into schools and did school productions. We did productions at the Fortune Theatre itself. We did occasional productions at Regent and toured.
Barry Dorking says professional theatre has always struggled in Dunedin and in much of the world, but he believes a model will be found which allows quality productions and talent to be showcased professionally in the city.
I think it's remarkable that a city the size of Dunedin kept a professional theatre company going for 45 years. And now it's part of the fabric. It's expected. I mean, as you heard from the people here today, they're devastated.
While Fortune Theatre's physical doors have closed, many in Dunedin hope the spirit of the company and the shows it produced will live on. The Theatre's Trust will hold its general meeting later this month, when it is expected its own future will be determined. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
After 6 tonight here on Checkpoint, residents in Piha say a formal emergency plan for the area is urgently needed after 2 severe floods and 2 power cuts, all in just 4 months. And the Archbishop of Canterbury admits he's nervous about officiating at the royal wedding next week. And what constitutes made in New Zealand when you're shopping for clothes? We take a closer look at this issue. Don't forget, we love your feedback on the New Zealand made issue or any of them. You can text us on 2101, contact us at Checkpoint on Twitter at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Here's Anna with the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The man who is receiving an ex gratia payment from the government in lieu of paid parental leave says he's overwhelmed. The government is making the payment to the Christchurch man after his partner died in childbirth and he wasn't eligible for paid parental leave. Keith Falconer says he did not start the day wanting to get a big payment.
I started the day just wanting to highlight a hole in the system. You know, the money wasn't and the payment wasn't what I wanted, but it doesn't enable me to have a life with my son.
Keith Falconer says the support from his employer has been incredible, but the government payment will be a huge relief. The government may get rid of benefit stand-down periods for people who do seasonal work. When a person goes off the benefit and works for more than 26 weeks, they have to wait for 2 weeks before they can go back on it. The Employment Minister, Willie Jackson, says the government will investigate whether a stand-down period is needed at all for seasonal workers. He says they think the punitive approach is not the way to go. And the Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, says costs can make it tricky to take up short-term jobs like seasonal work.
We discussed this while in opposition. It's in our Future of Work report as well. We need to look at the system to make sure that the transitions are seamless, and that's something that we'll be looking to consider as part of the welfare overhaul.
Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni. After 20 years, Tourism New Zealand is set to change the focus of its 100% pure brand. The organisation's Chief Executive, Stephen England Hall, told the industry event Trends in Dunedin that they plan to change the brand in the coming months. Mr England Hall says the brand does not showcase New Zealand's unique people and culture, and the government agency will work with Māori tourism and other groups to relaunch next year. And Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the tourism industry needs to focus more on sustainability, infrastructure investment and high-value visitors. A new study says tourism accounts for 8% of global carbon emissions, about 3 times more than previously estimated. The report, published in the journal Nature, includes details on the carbon footprint linked to tourists, food, shopping and accommodation, as well as their travel. The BBC's Matt McGrath has the details.
Tourism is booming, growing by around 4% every year. Now, for the first time, a scientific study has taken a detailed look at every aspect of leisure touring. The US, China, Germany and India have the biggest overall tourism footprints, while popular long-distance destinations like the Maldives have the highest emissions per head of population. But the key to the rise are travellers from well-to-do countries like the UK who demand higher carbon transport and better quality accommodation and services on their holidays compared to people from poorer nations.
Matt McGrath reporting. 2 men were left unconscious after being assaulted in a frenzied attack by a group of 8 men on Auckland's Queen Street at the weekend. The police say the 2 victims were walking down the street about 2:30 on Saturday morning when the group started attacking them. They say CCTV footage of the assault is too graphic to release. Detective Constable Tom Malcolm says one of the victims commented that he liked the music the group was playing, but that was the only interaction they had. The men remain in Auckland Hospital recovering from their injuries. Mr Malcolm says the police are concerned about the random nature of the attack and they're appealing for witnesses. The United States President Donald Trump says he will announce his decision on whether to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal early tomorrow, New Zealand time. Mr Trump faces a May 12 deadline over whether to remain in the 2015 international deal, which provides Iran with relief from sanctions in exchange for limiting its uranium enrichment capacity. He's been highly critical of the agreement, saying he will pull the US out unless European signatories fix what he's called its serious shortcomings. The BBC's Barbara Plett-Asher reports.
The tweet by President Trump cut short a last-ditch drive by the Europeans to try to convince him to stick with the accord. They were expecting his decision at the end of the week. Boris Johnson was the latest to travel to Washington to argue Europe's case. He didn't meet Mr. Trump, but made a point of appearing on the president's favorite cable news show, Fox and Friends, to deliver his message. He said, yes, the agreement had flaws, but it was preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon, and there was no better way to do that at the moment. Administration officials have been saying that Mr. Trump appears inclined to scrap the deal. But the Europeans are hoping for some kind of compromise that would help them salvage the agreement if the US pulled out. The crucial question is whether Mr. Trump would refrain from penalizing nations that trade with Iran, even if he did reimpose sanctions on the Islamic Republic.
Barbara Plett-Asher in Washington. It's 6:05. The Kiwis' new coach will be named on Thursday, and the former South Sydney coach Michael Maguire appears set to take over the reins of the National Rugby League side. Australian media reports suggest that the 44-year-old Maguire will replace David Kidwell, who stepped down after last year's disastrous World Cup campaign. Maguire coached the Rabbitohs for 5 years, guiding them to the NRL Premiership in 2014. South African rugby officials are refusing to quash speculation that they'll leave Super Rugby and join the top European club competition. The Johannesburg-based Lions, the Durban-based Sharks and Cape Town franchise the Stormers are reportedly planning to leave Super Rugby. Super Rugby's governing body, SANZAR, has dismissed the report as wrong. However, the president of the Lions franchise, Kevin de Klerk, says there are millions of pounds on offer in Europe and market forces could force a move to the Northern Hemisphere when the current Super Rugby broadcasting deal expires in a couple of years. And the world snooker champion Mark Williams has promised to perform naked cartwheels if he repeats the effort next year after stripping off in celebration of his latest win. The 43-year-old Welshman won his third world title in Sheffield 15 years after his last, making him the oldest winner at the Crucible since 45-year-old Ray Reardon in 1978. Williams fulfilled a promise to hold his winner's press conference naked. What a joy that was, although he wore a towel to protect his modesty. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples a new live album from Neil Young. We have a window on the world of Knights Templar International, which has nothing to do with the Holy Grail, although some of their members possibly wouldn't mind another holy war. And our after dinner speaker is the New Zealand Initiative's Eric Crampton, with some libertarian thoughts on cannabis legalisation and the coming budget.
And unlike Brian, I can't tell you exactly what we're up to because it's an ever-changing landscape as we head towards 10 p.m. I do know we'll wrap up the day's news in the long bulletin at 10, and I'll be talking to newsmakers from around the country with an eye on international events from the foreign desk. That's Lately with Karen Hay, live between 10 and 11 weeknights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, mainly fine. However, areas of cloud and isolated showers in western areas south of Auckland. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, apart from a few early showers about the western ranges. Northwesterlies easing early tomorrow. For Bulla, isolated showers turning to rain tonight, then clearing early tomorrow and becoming fine. Westland and Fiordland, rain spreading north, briefly heavy with possible thunderstorms. The rain will clear overnight, but a few showers remain about Fiordland. Otago and Southland and Stewart Island, brief rain, then mainly fine. A few showers lingering about coastal Southland until tomorrow morning. West to northwest gales, severe in exposed places, easing early tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, a mix of fine and cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 6:09, and you're listening to Checkpoint with Rowan Quinn.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I am in for John Campbell tonight. Well, what makes a piece of clothing New Zealand made? The renowned fashion label World has come under scrutiny for labelling T-shirts as New Zealand made when they were actually made offshore by another brand. As a result, it may have found itself falling foul of the law. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Christine Crabb is the director and designer behind the label Miss Crabb. She says about 99% of her production happens in Auckland, not too far from her studio in Grey Lynn. She's got a network of machinists who work from home, but a shortage of industrial knitters around the country means that work is done in Tauranga.
We deal with everyone, on a personal level. We can go and figure out any problems or be really face-to-face about deadlines and things like that. So it's really awesome. I love that we make in New Zealand.
But Christine Crabb says producing everything in New Zealand does have its limits. For the first time ever, she's doing a run of denim jeans and jackets in Australia because she isn't able to do a certain wash here.
So rather than getting the jeans made here, sending them to Australia to get washed and then send them back, we're just getting the whole run done in Australia, which is a new thing for us.
But Christine Crabb says that's something they will be transparent about with their customers. That's a contrast to World's approach. Consumer New Zealand Chief Executive Sue Chetwin says World could be falling foul of fair trading laws by putting Made in New Zealand swing tags on T-shirts that are actually made offshore. She says under the law, customers shouldn't be deceived or misled by labels, and if they aren't happy, they should take the items back.
They thought it was a T-shirt that was designed and made in New Zealand by World, and that's why they paid a premium for it. I mean, they could probably go and buy the same T-shirt for about a quarter of the price, at another shop.
Anna Hayward from Buy New Zealand Made says while World isn't one of its licensees, the T-shirts wouldn't meet its criteria for the use of its branding. She says simply embellishing a garment locally at the end of the production process isn't enough.
For us to be happy for it to be labelled as New Zealand made, it needs to be sewn here. It needs to go through a significant manufacturing process. So sticking on a patch onto an already created garment isn't enough of a process.
Claire Hart is the project manager of Tier Fund's Ethical Fashion Guide. She says unless a garment is made from wool, it's near impossible to make a garment from start to finish in New Zealand.
You can definitely get garments that are made final stage manufacturing here in New Zealand. So that might mean that the garment's actually sewn together here. But especially when it comes to cotton, we don't farm cotton in New Zealand, we don't gin it, we don't produce fabric. So you can't do a farm-to-shop production of a cotton garment here in New Zealand en masse.
When Dame Denise was awarded her New Year's honour last year, she told RNZ that she was most proud of the fact all of World's designs were still New Zealand made. She went on to say she wanted to rebrand the Made in New Zealand logo to better promote goods here.
Not an enormous fan of the Kiwi in the triangle, because I don't think it represents us properly, not for fashion design, but for across the board of New Zealand design. I might even put it out there to students to come up with a logo that every New Zealand-made designer would be happy to put on their product.
The Commerce Commission says it's so far received 5 complaints about World's labels. It says it's taken a number of country of origin cases in recent years, but none of them have involved clothing. Last year, a health supplement company and its owner were fined more than $500,000 for claiming bee pollen was New Zealand made when it was in fact sourced in China. Almost a dozen companies have been prosecuted since 2011 for selling imported alpaca rugs as made in New Zealand. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The All Whites and the Football Ferns will now be paid the same after a pay parity deal was announced this afternoon. The Chief Executive of New Zealand Football, Andy Martin, says a combined collective agreement and equality for their senior men's and women's national teams was a chance to make a statement. The Football Ferns will now get the same percentage share of prize money, equal rights for image use, and for the first time they'll fly business class when representing New Zealand. Sports reporter Clay Wilson spoke with Andy Martin this afternoon and started by asking him about their motivations for the detail behind the new deal.
Look, it's the right thing to do, I think, first and foremost. We've got a business that's very committed to diversity and inclusion, and we've been working on that for a while across the whole business. So when this opportunity came up to really put us on on an equal footing across the men and the women. It was a simple thing that we wanted to achieve, and it was great that the PFA had the same sort of thought process. We weren't a million miles apart in terms of our previous agreements, but we hadn't really had the opportunity to bring the two together. So yeah, it's been really good. We want to really focus on the women's game for the next couple of years ahead of the World Cup, and this was a great opportunity to do the right thing and put it on a firm footing, really.
In terms of pay parity specifically, there's perhaps still an argument out there that the men's game generates X amount and the women's game only generates X amount, so why perhaps should we have pay parity? Where do you guys stand in that debate?
Well, we've proven that we're not sure we agree with that. I think what we're saying is, we have a group of elite athletes that are available to us to help us achieve our goals, which are winning on the field and commercial goals and stuff, so we're paying them the same. I think when it comes to the prize money, ultimately we're giving them the same percentage. That might be where there's a differential. So prize money for the Men's World Cup will be different for the Women's World Cup. That's out of our hands, and that is driven by those commercial realities. But what we're saying is we'll divide the percentages exactly the same based on the two teams.
In terms of other sports following your lead here, you guys have your own circumstances. Rugby, cricket, the other main sports in this country have their own circumstances. Would you hope that others would follow, or do you perhaps appreciate that circumstances are different elsewhere?
Look, it is very different. Some of those sports you mentioned are top-down funded with big TV deals. I think our focus is on us and saying, we want football to be very inclusive across the country. So this is a statement to say at the top end we can show we mean business.
I guess this is a big step for you guys in terms of the women's game, but how much further do you see there is to go here? How much more room for growth and development is there in this space in terms of the equality with the men's game?
There's plenty more room to go. So I think you just look at, so we've created the Kate Shepherd Cup this year to sort of put it on a par with the Chatham Cup. We've extended the Women's National League to 2 rounds this year to put it on a par with the Handa Premiership. But it's very difficult to attract the sponsors to the women's game where we can to the men's game. So we've got to find a way to break through. People out there looking at these opportunities to own the women's game, to own the Women's National League, to be the brand that really leads on women's sport in New Zealand.
That's the New Zealand Football CEO Andy Martin speaking to our sports reporter Clay Wilson. Residents in Piha say a formal emergency plan for the area is urgently needed after 2 severe floods and 2 power cuts in the space of 4 months. The Waitakere local board says the recent weather events have been a wake-up call, and it's organising a meeting between civil defence and key leaders in the community about what needs to be done. Our reporter Jessie Chang went out to speak to locals about their concerns.
It's a beautiful day out in the rugged west coast of Auckland, but on Glenesk Road, residents are still cleaning up debris from last month's powerful flood that damaged properties and closed roads. It was the latest in a series of extreme weather events, which included an 8-day power cut only weeks before. Barry Watt says in the 60 years that he's been around the area, the flooding was the worst he had seen.
There was lots of twigs and branches and all that sort of stuff along the fence line, which will take me months to clean up most probably.
So how high did the water get up to?
Well, you can see that along the fence here, it was at least up close to the top of the fence, right up to here, about 1.5 metres over on the back.
Barry Watt says he's concerned there'll be more to come as winter approaches, and a concrete emergency plan is crucial. Heidi Padane, who's been in the area for more than 20 years, agrees there are gaps.
We are likely to see more extreme weather events, and we definitely need to have something a little bit more solid in place than what we have currently, and I'm not even sure what we have currently.
Heidi Padane says while there's frustration among some people in the community who think the Waitakere Rangers local board should have been more organised, finger pointing isn't constructive.
Hey bro, who are you?
No, it's funny because all those other things, Peter Chapman is well known in the community, having owned the Piha store for the last 17 years. He'll be going to the meeting, but while he thinks it's needed, he says people have to accept that the isolated location requires resilience.
If there is to be a way forward that where you do draw those various groups in and bring the strands in together, if you like, and thread something that says, well, this is what we want to create, Yeah, sure. I think what will happen is it'll sift a few people out.
Waitakere Rangers local board member Sandra Coney accepts there needs to be a new emergency plan. She says local emergency services have been quick to respond to the events, but part of the meeting to discuss the new plan will look at where improvements can be made. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang, TNA.
The US President Donald Trump has tweeted that he'll announce his decision on whether to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal tomorrow at around 6 a.m. New Zealand time. Mr. Trump faces a May the 12th deadline over whether to remain in the 2015 international deal, which provides Iran with relief from sanctions in exchange for limiting its uranium enrichment capacity. He's been highly critical of the agreement, saying he'll pull the US out unless European signatories fix what he calls serious shortcomings. He's been lobbied on the issue by the leaders of France and Germany, and today it's been the turn of the UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who appealed to Mr. Trump not to tear up the deal. The BBC's Nick Bryant has the latest from Washington.
On American television this morning, a double serving of Boris at breakfast. The Foreign Secretary appearing on Donald Trump's favourite news show, Fox and Friends, to address an audience of one.
We think that what you can do is be tougher on Iran, address the concerns of the president, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
And just in case the president has switched channels, he popped up on a rival network to repeat a bad deal is better than no deal.
You know, I understand that people have anxieties about this deal, and of course they're right in the sense that it is very far from perfect, but it is the best thing that we have at the moment.
Donald Trump has called the Iran deal a disaster and says he'll announce his decision tomorrow. And although the Foreign Secretary isn't scheduled to shake hands with the US President before then, that hasn't stopped him stroking his ego.
If he can fix North Korea, and if he can fix the Iran nuclear deal, then I don't see why he's any less of a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize than Barack Obama, who got it before he even did anything.
Signed by Iran and 6 world powers in 2015, this landmark deal was the signature foreign policy achievement of Barack Obama's presidency, one that lifted crippling economic sanctions in return for limitations on the country's nuclear energy program. But Donald Trump thinks it's far too lenient on Tehran.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. It's insane, it's ridiculous, it should have never been made.
But is there room for a compromise, a fudge, one in which America would withdraw from the deal without necessarily blowing it up? One which would allow European countries to continue trading with Iran, while at the same time exerting more pressure on Tehran over its ballistic missile technology and regional aggression.
Long live the United States, long live France.
Boris Johnson is not the first European to compliment, charm and cajole the French President Emmanuel Macron last month, pleading with Mr. Trump to accept that kind of compromise. And the German Chancellor Angela Merkel made the same case just a few days later. So from the Foreign Secretary, a final face-to-face plea to senior administration officials, such as the new Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said the Iran deal is built on lies. That view is shared by Donald Trump, and the final decision rests with him.
That's Nick Bryant reporting from Washington there. Well, hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders have moved to Australia to try to build better lives for themselves, but many have been lured back here by the pull of family or because of difficulties accessing subsidised study places at Australian universities or welfare payments. But the move back to New Zealand's proving a struggle for some families who say high living costs and lower wages could potentially push them back across the Tasman. Te Manu Kōrahi reporter John Boynton has more.
Rochelle Palmer met her Kiwi husband John in Brisbane, and 4 years ago they moved to Whenua Kite in the Coromandel.
We were caught up in the rat race of busy city life, outskirts of, suburban life, I guess, and we just wanted a change of scenery and have something to do with John's side of the family, and having 2 boys, we thought New Zealand might be a good place to let them be free, yeah.
In Australia, Rochelle Palmer could afford to be a stay-at-home mum, but in New Zealand she splits her time between her 4 sons and working 3 cleaning jobs. Her husband John is a mechanical engineer and works full-time, but has often struggled to find work in their small community. She's shocked at the low wages and the high cost of food, power and rent in New Zealand.
There were moments, and there still are every now and then, of times where we have to go, well, actually, how are we doing food shopping next week? And how are we going to pay that power bill that's 3 weeks overdue? And it's seriously we just go back to survival mode of, okay, well, what don't we use? What can we sell to pay the power bill or to buy food next week?
Moving closer to Auckland for work, Rochelle says, isn't an option she's willing to take.
For us, it defeats the purpose of us moving here. We came here for a lifestyle change, and moving back to this rat race, we might as well go back to my family in Aussie.
Jan Stewart lived in Brisbane for 18 years with her husband Ken, after both were made redundant from their jobs in Whangarei. Last year, they retired and decided to move back to Whangarei. Jan says she was shocked to find out how much New Zealand had changed.
The cost of living is really, really expensive compared to what we're used to. And so the dollar doesn't go as far as it did in Australia for us. Of course, rental properties, quite a bit more dear than Brisbane. And cost of homes, of course. Our home that we lived there was worth about $500,000. Well, you'd pay $1 million for the same type of home back here in Whangarei.
Another reason Jan Stewart is looking to return to New Zealand is the poor standard of healthcare she says her husband has received so far. After being unable to walk, she said her husband Ken was rushed to the hospital, only to be discharged a short time later.
Then he's called me, I've picked him up and brought him back home, only to find that I've had to take him back early hours of the morning for them to realise that he had 5 cracked ribs and a pair of lungs.
A return back to Australia, Jan says, is on the cards.
We are really thinking of returning back to Australia after all this.
Have you given yourself a time frame?
It's my husband will go tomorrow. I've just missed my family so much, even though I have my 2 children that live there. They aren't in no crisis or situations like I see all my nieces and nephews.
Carmen Brown has lived in Australia for the last 23 years, apart from a brief 2-year stint when she returned home to New Zealand. But it was a stint that made her family quickly hop back across the ditch to Perth.
It was just struggle street from the time we got home. It was just, we couldn't believe how much things were costing. Houses had doubled in price since we'd left in 95. Power bills, you get them monthly there. We get them 2 to 3 months here and pay less than what you do a month back home.
Carmen Brown currently works part-time at a supermarket and earns $26 per hour. And her family has been able to build their own home with grants from the Australian government. Although she'll always call the Taranaki region home, she can't see her family moving back to New Zealand unless she's living mortgage-free.
I loved growing up in New Zealand. I wish my kids had had that kind of same experience, but then Australia has been wonderful for them too.
Recent statistics show more Kiwis are making the jump across the ditch. In the year to March 2018, 20,000 people left for Australia, while just 15,000 returned home. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
And in some news just coming through now, the government's set to dramatically hike its international aid by roughly $700 million over the next 4 years. And most of it will be going to the Pacific to help with situations like climate change as part of the government's so-called Pacific Reset. The Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters is currently unveiling the details to diplomats at Parliament.
As New Zealand's foreign policy has long been characterised by the strength of its independent voice, this is a very important speech. As the Prime Minister said in Paris recently, we are self-deprecating people, quick to downplay our relative importance, but in spite of that, one that has never been afraid to use its voice. Now, from Peter Fraser's post-Second World War advocacy for a new international system in the aftermath of the war, to this government's leadership on climate change, that voice has been strongest when New Zealand's deeply held values have been projected onto the world stage. As a small nation of fewer than 5 million people, skilled diplomacy has proven to be an essential part of protecting our vital national interests and securing domestic prosperity. That voice has never been more important to protect our interests in a troubled world and support the family of Pacific nations who share our neighbourhood. That voice is ultimately the voice of the New Zealand people. Tonight's speech seeks to explain to our people, our citizens and our taxpayers, why restoring lost capacity in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade is an example of the coalition government tackling difficult problems, and why the coalition views it as a priority that New Zealand's independent foreign policy is placed on a sound footing.
And this funding boost represents a 30% increase in overseas development funding. The government will also increase support for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade by about $190 million over that same 4-year budget period. That'll allow the ministry to reopen its Stockholm embassy in Sweden and hire an additional 50 staff. Well, just time to squeeze in a quick little bit of feedback before Checkpoint finishes. One listener says, "I always buy New Zealand made, determined to support our own people. I check the tags and I depend on the information to be true and an honest statement. I can't believe that anyone would lie about this, let alone the owner of the world brand, Dame Denise." Well, that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us, however you connected, radio, TV or online, and we'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has announced it will boost aid to the Pacific by more than $700 million over 4 years. The Employment Minister says the government is looking at scrapping the 2-week stand-down period for beneficiaries who take up seasonal work. Tourism New Zealand plans to change its 20-year-old 100% pure brand and focus instead on the country's unique people and culture. And a father says he is overwhelmed to be getting an ex gratia payment in lieu of paid parental leave after his partner died in childbirth. Our next news and weather is at 7.
If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first within 20 working days of the broadcast. To find out about those standards or to lodge a complaint, go to